that on. There I am. And this is the one for everyone else. Good morning. Great to have you all here. And we are live streaming this, so thanks for tuning in, and welcome to everyone who might be joining us across the miles. We are excited to have these next 3 weeks ahead of us where we are really emphasizing and celebrating and honoring the 40th anniversary of Faith Lutheran. Just a reminder today is hearing from our charter members, or some of our charter members, and we'll get into that in just a minute. Next week, we will have some of our former presidents of the congregation. We'll be answering some questions and sharing more about the last 40 years. So today is about the very beginning, the predecessor congregations, Messiah and Advent, and then next week will be, we're going to just throw 40 years in 45 minutes, basically. And then the third week, that at the end of January, we'll be having time in St. Michael's Hall where we will be talking about our future. What do these 40 years mean for how God is calling us into the future? So we're kind of taking that switch then, that move into who we are today and where God might be leading us into the future. So we're looking forward to all of this. I am so grateful to members here who are charter members of Faith Lutheran Church. Some of them were actually charter members of the two predecessor congregations, Advent and Messiah, and others had joined those congregations prior to Faith Lutheran being born. And so what they have been instructed is to just simply respond to a few questions that will be presented to them. Interestingly enough, a lot of this work was done by the Adult Faith Formation team, which was then called Emmaus, several years ago. We had planned a month-long emphasis on the history of Faith Lutheran, and that was to begin the end of March 2020. So that obviously had to be set aside, and so it's perfect timing to bring some of those notes back and to lift up the wonderful 40 years of Faith Lutheran. The Lord be with you all. Good and gracious God, we do give you thanks for this day and for this morning of worship to come together in your holy name and to praise you and to hear your good news once again. But now we come and give you thanks once again for this congregation and for the 40 years that it has been about your good news, that it has been a beacon of your light in this community, and all through the years, on the shoulders of people who were brave enough and had the courage to think about becoming Faith Lutheran Church. So we ask that your Holy Spirit be with us, that you bless our conversation and our storytelling. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. If you were here last weekend, we listed the members who were charter members of Faith Lutheran. I gave the caveat and apology last week that we are still growing that list, we understand. We have wonderful archives downstairs, but the one thing we have yet to find is an actual official list of charter members of Faith Lutheran Church. And so we have been just kind of taking it from other documents along the way and to build that list. So again, we are also working on a history book. There's a wonderful, wonderful history book that was done for the 10th anniversary of Faith Lutheran. So we've got the first 10 years covered, and now we've got a few people working on the other 30. And in that history book will be a list of our charter members of Faith Lutheran. So if you know that you're a charter member, or you are certain that you know of others who are charter members, please don't worry about duplicating. Just make sure you talk to Pastor Megan or me or a church office and just say, you got these people on the list, right? That would be really helpful. Okay, no further ado, we have some questions. And what we're going to do is I've invited our charter members to just raise their hand, and they can stand where they are seated and respond. I've invited them to be fairly brief in their response because we have quite a few questions to go through. So here we go. And charter members, I would love it if you would share your name And if you were part of a predecessor congregation, name that congregation. That would be wonderful. My first question is for Advent. For those who were Advent members, how did you learn about the formation of Advent? So this is the beginning of Advent Lutheran. What caused you to join this mission congregation in 1976? Do we have any charter members who were at the beginning of Advent who joined? Gloria, can you share just a little bit of what you remember of those days?
I don't remember if I heard about it on the radio. Gloria, Anson, Criswell. I don't remember if I heard about it on the radio or in the newspaper, but I heard that there was a church forming, and I thought I was being part of a mission congregation because that had never happened in my life. And meeting at Valley West Gators, moving Gators, and so I went there to the movement.
Okay. So you heard about it somehow through a different publication or however, and then joined shortly after. Great. Other early members of Advent.
My name is Mark Johnson, and Ron and I and the kids got back here in 1976 from Indiana, and a member of our home congregation in Ellsworth, Iowa, Ralph Olson, wrote a check for $100,000 to buy the land that we are now praying on.
We are working on photos as well, and there's some wonderful photos of the dedication of this land from the farmland and the groundbreaking for Advent. So we'll be pulling those up in the days to come. Any other beginning members of Advent that have a story?
We happened to live just, trial happened, and my husband has passed away, but we lived just about 6 blocks east of here, and we had heard the same thing. There was going to be a church here, and then we were members of Zion, which was way down in Peterbilt because we once lived in Peterbilt. But we kept anticipating getting on the church because I was getting really tired of driving to people. So we heard there was one coming here. Just so happens David had some uncles come in from California. The aunt and uncle that lived here happened to bring them to our house. The pastor's out canvassing the neighborhood. And I'm asking her if she knows anything, and she goes, I do, because the pastor that's hired is right next door to us in West Des Moines. Whoa! And she looks out my kitchen window and goes, well, there he is right there. And the door. And I go to the door, and I open the door, and he goes, hi, I'm Pastor Ron Lundeen, and I'm here. And I said, yes, I know. He goes, you know? And I said, yes. And he said, we're going to build a church at the, yes, I know. And so I said, come in. So he comes in, looks in the kitchen, and says, well, hi, Betty, David's aunt. So he goes, oh. So then we go in to live in the family room. He meets all these uncles and us. And we talk for a long time, and then as he's ready to go, he goes, are you thinking about a church? Oh yeah, I've heard all about this. And I said, and it's Lutheran, that's great. And he says, well, how would you like to canvass the neighborhood? I said, you're doing that. He goes, no, I mean you doing that. So we went out and asked all, and it was like from here to there and east. And when we gathered the first time at the theater, we got this all done. And of course, him knowing us, and it was like, why don't you be a Sunday school? Why don't that? So anyway, it turns out all these people are from this area, and we're all Sunday school teachers. And we worked out fine. We put it together.
If you've never been part of a mission congregation before, you understand that if you become part of a mission congregation, you are put to work right away. So that's for sure. Herb, did you have a hand up?
I don't remember much except a friend kidding me that we were members of the Church of the Holy Cinnamon.
right? So as we know, or we've heard already, Advent began to worship in the theaters that formerly were at Valley West Mall on the east side, right? Entrance, if I remember correctly, going to movies there as a kid. So yeah. Any other stories at the beginning of Advent? All right, mission congregation, starting from brand new. That's Advent. Now we have Messiah. And Messiah had a different story in its beginning. So I would love to invite anyone who can talk a little bit about Messiah and help us understand, if you can, just some of the issues that led to the split from Trinity Lutheran. It wasn't just about Trinity, it was about the Missouri Synod body at that time, and what the process was that led to leaving Trinity. So this is, again, a little different story. Anyone from Messiah here that would be able to speak to that a little bit? I'm going to start over here.
I'll take a shot at it here. My name's Jim Covey. I was a member of Trinity when the split occurred. Lots of issues came about. I'll talk about some of the lead up and then the match that led to feuds. As Pastor indicated, there was a lot of strife within the Missouri Synod over historical, critical scripture, and what's the other side of that?
Well, interpretation. Yeah.
Interpretation. Things like, is the story of Jonah and the whale an allegory, or is it to be taken absolutely the way it's written? And there were things like this going on in the seminary. The father-in-law of the pastor at Trinity was a professor at the St. Louis Seminary and was embroiled in that. And some of the pastors, or some of the professors, were splitting off into kind of a separate little theological group. Well, our pastor, being, I guess you would say, a little bit less strict than some of the others, did things that were heretical to some of the members, like he participated in a wedding of one of the congregational members, a young woman married a Catholic. And he went to the Catholic Church and participated in the service. Can you imagine? Well, it really, really riled some feathers. Particularly the feathers of one member of the congregation who, behind the scenes and openly, was working very much in opposition to the pastor and really sowing some nasty seeds within the congregation. It finally boiled down to a vote, as I remember it. The vote was to be taken, and one good way of splitting congregations is to take a vote. So anyhow, the vote basically, as I remember, was, will we have open communion or close communion? And those who have a historical memory of the Missouri Synod Lutheran remember close communion says you don't take communion unless you're a member of that congregation or you go to the pastor and announce. Even today, I have that within our own family. Mary's brother-in-law is a Missouri Synod Lutheran pastor. I have never taken communion in his church. But anyhow, the vote was taken. The vote came out. The congregational meeting had about 4 times the normal number of people at the congregational meeting. And the vote came out slightly along the line that we were going to maintain this historical close communion. A few days later, a group of people met to say, are we going to stay here, or are we going to go off in a different direction? And a different direction it was.
Thank you, Jim.
wanted to let you know the vote was 67 to 64.
Another word from the beginning, and then we'll talk about the formation of Messiah.
Yeah, I was at Trinity first, and then really kind of was wandering. I didn't go to that meeting, and I didn't feel I was a good enough member of the Catholic team. The pastor, Pastor Tavis, married Jerry and me at Trinity. You know, I remember he announced that he would be leaving. And it took months to do that. We had tracts of literature from what was called Seminex, which was the people who'd been expelled from Missouri Synod. And I would share that information with my mother, who would then take it up at some of the meetings in her Missouri Synod church in Minnesota and raise issues they didn't know anything about. She was a little bit of a troublemaker. But it's right, it was a vote. It was 3 votes that decided that. It was the day that they retired the debt on the building also. And then I worked with some people at Trinity after I left. I never told them that I'd been a member of Trinity. I never worked with one of them where they did not mention that vote sucked the lifeblood out of their congregation. And anybody who really mattered that left came to what was in this.
Not to be dismissed of how painful that journey was for the very people in this room. So thank you. Yeah.
Vicki Garrett. I just wanted to say that Pastor Tavis who was there at the time, and who was leaving, made it clear that he didn't want us to be going with him. So that's why he was leaving early. We had to decide on our own whether we wanted to leave or not. And also that there were a lot of meetings in our church about what was going on with all of that. So we had a lot of information to go on to.
Could someone speak a little bit about the formation of Messiah then, and the very early days of Messiah, and what that was like, kind of starting your own mission congregation? Anyone willing to share a little bit about that? Great.
I'm Rod Thorson from Messiah. A former Catholic. I came in just after all this was happening. I think I was the first marriage of Messiah that had to happen at Grace Lutheran, because we didn't have a building. We had people, but we didn't have a home yet. So Julie and I were married at Grace we had Pastor John Google at that point. Then we moved and used the Baptist Church on the corner of Hickman.
Keep the mic up, Rob. Keep the mic up.
Sorry. Was it the Presbyterian? So we did services there between their services, and I'm going for the ride at this point. You know, Catholics aren't involved in the organization unless you're a big giver or super involved. And all of this was so new to me, and then to learn that my father-in-law was one of the head rebels was interesting. But then we did finally get into a double office condo out at 86th and Hickman, just north of the Perkins. And that's, Michael, I think, was one of the first baptisms of the congregation. And it was really close-knit, but we wanted a church building that we didn't have. And we needed more room.
Thank you. The beginnings of Messiah. Don.
Don Beck, and basically supervised us all. We did all the work ourselves, as I remember it. And it was quite a project to finish out the inside of this duplex or double unit. When we bought it, it was totally unfinished. And we had quite a few work nights. It was fun.
Yes.
My name is Trudy Holst, and I was a charter member of Asylum. I get a little emotional. Don elected to say that they made some really innovative creations in that building. Doors that open and then folded back. You know, Sunday school rooms, and it was amazing.
Mm.
There were 38 families that left Trinity, about 100 individuals, and we all loved each other.
Jim Covey again. I talk too much. Some of the people neglected, they hinted just at the fact that the president of Trinity, several of the elders of Trinity, the organist at Trinity, ushers, many, the head of the Sunday school, all were members of Messiah. This became a blessing for Trinity. People who were sitting in the pews and watching had to step up.
Let's move a little bit further down the road now. So Advent was worshiping at the theater, and then all of a sudden came up with an idea of moving to a land that eventually was donated to build this building. Can someone just speak about that whole process a little bit? The process of moving into the structure that we see out there. Anyone have memories of that? Advent folks?
I remember that when we left the movie theater, we planned for the weekend that we were going to march from the movie theaters here to the property and have the groundbreaking.
Huh.
I don't remember what weekend that was.
It's in the history book coming out. I can't remember the date either. But it wasn't too long. I mean, you weren't in the theaters too terribly long, were you?
It was a big deal when we got pews at Advent. It was much easier to pay attention then and worry about your discomfort. And there's another item of fact that very few people know about. It was 1979. The pastor at Advent was very ambitious, I'm sure in the name of the Lord. We were growing here, but he thought that we could merge with another congregation. All the people that I was serving with on the council are now gone, but a person on the council at Shepherd of the Valley, Ken Kloffenstein, he and Karen at that point in time worshiped there, obviously. And so the pastor led us to a meeting with the council of Shepherd of the Valley, and we presented a proposal because they were thinking about moving out west. So we presented them with a proposal. Remember, we were ambitious to buy Shepherd of the Valley on the corner of 39th and Ashworth. And I remember the look of the members of the council of Shepherd of the Valley who were totally offended by the fact that we as an upstart with a different flavor of the Lutheran tradition would have the guts to come and try to buy their building.
I hadn't heard that story. Wow. Yeah, another part of it. Okay, because of time, let's move on. So now we're up to what I understand to be close to 1984, and there began some conversations. And there are so many interesting stories, which I believe each of them to be true, but they're different stories about how these conversations started and how we came to be Faith Lutheran Church. So let's start down that road of how these two congregations started the conversations. I see.
Vicki Garrett again. We had a pastor at Messiah, not a pastor, we had a music director at Messiah, and his wife was the music director at Advent. And so I'm sure that had something to do with it.
So we're all a result of convenience. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Tell us some more. Tell us more about the history of coming together. All right.
This is less emotional for me. I thought that the synod basically said we can't have two mission churches so close together, and we need to think about combining them.
And those were two different synods. Right. AELC was Messiah, and Advent was ALC. So that's interesting. Okay. What else about those days of conversations and how the decision was to be?
One of the impetus from Messiah's side of the thing, Jim covered again, is Messiah really had no future. Being in a splinter synod, if you will, I think there were 100 congregations in the entire United States. We had no transfers coming in, worshiping in the lower level of an office condominium building. We weren't necessarily the shiniest congregation in the community. And so therefore, we really were in a no growth situation, no future situation, if you will. And I think that helped us from our side to say, yes, it makes sense. Here's this young, vibrant congregation of a whole different socioeconomic makeup that can really breathe some life in, and we have something to offer to them.
Thank you. Anyone, maybe from the Advent side? Yeah.
Well, I'm Ron Wilson, and I had the pleasure of being the last president of the Congregation of Advent. When I took the responsibility of being president, my good friend Julian Davis talked me into it. And it seemed like it was a piece of cake because he had it pretty easy going, and so I thought, well, I'll take that opportunity. But we were a very young, vibrant congregation. We had very few gray hairs, and what Messiah offered was gray hair and more stability. And the other thing is the people from Messiah were great people. The summer before we merged, we had cottage meetings with members of each congregation coming to these meetings and getting to know each other. And I feel that that process, which was a real task, was so valuable because people got to know each other and they got to feel comfortable with each other before the two congregations voted to merge. And so I think that those cottage meetings were really the great thing that we did to mold and develop and that we were able to merge the two congregations and that we lost very few members.
Thank you.
I'm somewhat surprised that in this discussion we haven't talked about the two pastors, Pastor Minster, Pastor Google. They both contributed gifts to that merger. They were dramatically different in their style, not in their commitment to the church, but in their style. But if it wouldn't have been for the leadership and supportive gifts of those two pastors, that would not have happened.
And we were really sad that the decision was made for both of them to leave in the beginning so that we could start out fresh. We were very sad to lose Pastor Google, and you were probably sad as well.
I haven't memorized the timeline of that. The decision, the vote was to become Faith Lutheran, where they were part of that vote. And then Faith began meeting that fall, the service of unity in the fall. Were they still part then, or had one? Okay. And then officially became the congregation on January 1st, 25. They were still there then? Or were they, is it that fall where they okay. And then they moved on. Got it. Thank you. Good. The remaining of our time, I mean, we could talk about that part of history for the next several weeks, of course. But what I would like to end with is talking about, which it's a no-brainer to think that there might be conflicts when two bodies are coming together and what that looks like, especially one moving into a building that already exists. But then, of course, we're going to end our time in talking about the joys of coming and being unified as a congregation. So let's just, any stories that you have and wish to share of that growing period of being these two congregations deciding to come together through great conversations in the cottage meetings, but what was it like to start living together? And don't mention any names. Thanks.
Jim Guppy again. Ron alluded to the gray hairs. There was a distinct difference in membership between the two congregations. Messiah did have a lot of gray hair. Advent was, and Messiah had the tradition of the German Lutheran Missouri Synod vestments, ritual, the whole 9 yards. Advent was a young congregation. Probably, I would guess that the average age difference, if you took the average age of Advent, the average age of Messiah, probably about a 15-year difference between the two. The other difference between the two is Advent was much more new people, many of them with no Lutheran tradition whatsoever, versus a congregation that was ankle deep in tradition. And that, I think, caused tensions for years and may still be causing an occasional tension. But there was high church, there was low church, and we didn't all sit on the same side of the church all the time either.
Other stories about what it was to begin together in those first few years. Oh, back there, and I'll come back. No, that's fine.
I'm Mark Lundy, this is my wife Linda Lundy. When we started looking at churches, and we were a couple about to get married, we explored several. We got invited to this one by Floyd Wright at Advent. We were rebuilding by that time, but we were so surprised and so pleased about the naming of the church. We had a committee that was kind of responsible for administering that process. And everybody in the congregation was invited to submit a name for the new church, the combined church. And there was a wide variety of names. There must have been 30 or 40 if I research right. But the first, a couple of them were Faith Lutheran Church, and the other one was St. Michael's Church. And when the vote came in, Faith won, I think fairly easily, but St. Michael's Hall has always been a mystery to people. Where did that name come from? And that was the number 2 choice for the church. I wanted to say I was on that committee with Pastor Lindstrom, and when we were looking through names and so on, I said, I'm telling you, it's going to be Faith Lutheran Church. And he said, you sound pretty good. I said, yeah, I'm in advertising, and I can tell you, I just have a gut feeling it's going to be Faith Lutheran Church. And sure enough, that's how it came out. I don't read this out. I don't remember Karen's, but she might have been on that committee. And I was on the call committee to bring Pastor Lindstrom here, and he turned out, when we met him in person, he came out, and he was kind of on the short side in physical stature and so on. And I was expecting somebody named Paul Lindstrom to look like Pastor Carlson. Big, tall, robust, he wasn't that at all, but he was a great pastor, and he's been blessed with lots of them.
Moving on. And didn't I understand that there was a prize for the people who put in the name of Faith Lutheran, and that was dinner with Bishop David Brown and his wife at the pastor's house. And so there was some kind of fun little thing that who got the prize there. Marshall, and then back to Vi.
Marshall Graylaw, and you've heard the name Herman. That's very important in the musical context in this congregation. We were doing some stuff fairly recently, and Don and I got back in touch with the Hermans and stuff too, but that name was very influential in both. The other thing I mentioned, we had a map fairly recently out on the wall there where our members lived, and you have a sense, it's like there was a big cluster right here around this church, and then there was a big cluster around Drake University within the last 20 years. So that was a very different congregation that way.
Vi, you had something to say?
I just wanted to mention, this is Vi Munch. When we first arrived from Minnesota, we moved in and we wondered what kind of a church we should go to. And here comes a pastor to our door. That was Pastor Lindstrom, and he strongly urged that we came to his church. And so we did. And I wanted to get involved with the women, and so they had a women's group, but the women's group was meeting in a school. And they asked me if I would like to come, and I said I sure would. So I went, and I walked in the door, and there were 2 tables. And I didn't know where to sit. And they said one table was Advent and the table was Messiah. So I just sat down. But there was differences.
Yeah. Great. I was going to mention, I know, and I'm not going to put them on the spot, but one just volunteered. We had a couple teenagers at the beginning of Advent that are in the room today.
Shonda Murphy, Don Beck's daughter, if you don't know that. So I was 13 in 1984. So I don't have a lot of memory of, I have vague memories of Messiah and that, but I do remember one little fact is that when we merged, we weren't big enough for Sunday school. So I remember driving down to Indian Hills Junior High, and that's where we had Sunday school classes. And then we had to, drive back. So
yeah. Yeah, that's right. Thanks for adding that. Over here, and then I'll be back.
I guess I'm probably the other teenage person who's a teenager in those days. I'm Peter the Singer, and my family came from the Advent side of things. And we used at Indian Hills back in the Advent days when you didn't have room for Sunday school. There used to be a little hotel over by where McDonald's is on 104th Street, Rolling Prairie Inn, and we had Sunday school in the lounge, which I think, back in those days, so many people smoked. It was the 70s, early 80s. I can't imagine what it smelled like. I don't have memories of it because everything probably smelled like that, but having Sunday school in a hotel lounge must have been a more interesting experience than I remember.
I forgot to give you my name, it's Rich Holtz. One of my best memories of starting out with the small little building at Advent, we had 2 teenage kids when we merged, and we lived out in Johnston. It took us a while to get here. We would always end up sitting in the kitchen for services.
And we like to say that's a good problem when you have to sit, in the overflow. Exactly. Let's just conclude our time of naming just the real blessings. We know some, right? We know that it grew the congregations. It grew the diversity of the congregations. But what were some of the other real blessings that some of you remember from those first few years of being Faith Lutheran?
I remember that we, for the youth to raise money, we had the spaghetti supper, which we're kind of still doing, but we had a talent night, and that was always so fun, and the older people and the younger people were all involved, and it was just a hoot. And I remember the 3 guys from Advent who dressed up like ladies and sang, and I remember that was one of the really fun things.
We have some videos of that we could show.
We do. I think some of you know John Leyendecker. He was a great videographer and photographer, and he had dropped off a box of VHS tapes and other things not too long before his passing, and Mike Gall took those over and have now digitalized all of those. So we have talent shows, hilarious, and I recognize some of the people in those talent shows. And there's the Messiah performance that we have, several Christmas programs, so it's a delight to now have that in accessible archives. 1 or 2 more comments, and then we'll close.
Just real quick, I wasn't involved in some of the theological stuff and really don't have much memory of the politics and whatever. I remember the college meetings and really agree that I think the college meetings made a big difference in smoothing this out because we could get to know people. But the thing I remember the most is all the work we were doing. And it was self-centered work, but a member of the congregation built our altar. A lot of the finished work here. I remember before we had pews, we had the orange chairs from Messiah sitting here on bare concrete floor. It was the ugliest thing you ever saw. But it didn't matter. I remember, and it was with another Messiah member, but gathering in the commons after the church. I hadn't seen the gentleman, Russ Hogenacker is his name. He sang in the choir, he was a cabinetry person, and he was a phenomenal human being. But I recognized how much of a community we were when it was important just to see somebody on Sunday and know that you didn't have to talk to them. Eye contact in a way was good enough. And we did have a purpose here at that time. And I'm glad to see that we, as expanded, that we now think more outside the walls, because I think that's an important part. And I don't know how to do that, I just know that it's important.
Thanks. One more comment from the crew about the beginning days. Anything else?
I would just add one of the blessings I think of in this space, and one reason I keep coming back is, and I know it's controversial at the time, but the purchase of the Dobbs in Oregon, the beautiful music that we have. I learned a little bit. I was reminded of the history of the Hermans and so forth, and their legacy. I think it's a huge blessing to have that organ in this space.
Indeed, it is. You will have Pastor Megan and I get the blessing, of course, of being present for a lot of events of people who don't belong here. And often the first time they walk in these doors, whether it's for a funeral or a recital or so forth, and the comments constantly are about this sanctuary, the light, the accessibility of this building. There was so much thought put into the building of not only the original one, but certainly the rest of the facility that was a little ahead of its time, and I know won some awards in architecture, and we just owe a great deal of gratitude for the minds who brought that all together. Yes. Yes, one more comment, you bet.
The comment on the organ brought to mind during the building committee's discussion. One of the biggest controversies was what we should put on this floor. Was it going to be carpet or was it going to be tile?
Indeed. Let us once again thank our charter members for their ministry. Thank you. Come back next week and we'll hear from our presidents over the 40 years. Go in peace, serve the Lord.